Now, technically, this is a post-Thanksgiving sermonette because Thanksgiving is so yesterday, isn't it? But not exactly because, it's still the season. We're still dealing with the effects of all the family get-togethers. And the general theme to be thankful is certainly a very godly one, and especially for our young people, because I always try and have something that's actionable and relevant for our young people. But I'd like you all to please turn to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, and this is traditionally called the Beatitudes chapter, even though there's more to the chapter after verse 12. But starting in verse 1, and this is about Jesus. When he saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, but obviously he wasn't so far removed from the crowd they couldn't hear him, because he then began to teach them, saying in verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them." And then he goes on, and there's a number of individual blessings, and that's what I want to talk about. You all can keep the chapter open and scan down it as I speak, please. Because in the Greek language, the word blessed is the word makariai. And the word is an adjective that's plural, masculine, and nominative. Now, nominative in the Greek language means the word is the recipient of the object of the action. In the passage, Jesus instructs us that a person will receive a blessing from God for the conduct mentioned. And I want to go down these Beatitudes and point out something that helps me move towards my main point. Starting in verse 3, as you read, Jesus tells us that those who are poor or humble in spirit are of the kingdom of heaven. That is to say, being humble of spirit is an attitude of people that Jesus seeks for his kingdom and his family. And likewise, those who mourn, those who are meek, and those who yearn for righteousness, those who are merciful and pure of heart. And now I want to stop for a moment at verse 9, those who seek peace. Each one of these attitudes are those of which a person must consciously adopt and practice and apply in their lives as an ongoing effort. For a given person, some of these attributes are easy. They kind of come with their personality. And some will be a challenge. And some, it might even be their proclivity to smother one of these. They have to work to bring out the need to do something like to show mercy to others, as an example. Some might just flow with a person's natural, outgoing, ebullient personality, as some people are. And we all have known those. And what is important to us is that they are part of how a person consciously relates to others in society and then to God. But starting in verse 10, in the last two of the Beatitudes, there's kind of a subtle difference. Blessed are those who are persecuted and those who are insulted. And these are situations where others decide to make you the target. Now, linguistically, technically, yes, the word blessed is still nominative, but in some ways, now this thing is happening to you because of what you did. And it's not something you chose to do or have any maybe direct control over. Yet Jesus tells us that we are still blessed as he would count blessings, should this happen to us through no action on our part. In preparing the sermonette, I consulted with a very thorough commentary on Matthew. And the commentary on this section started with a 3-page list of references that were books and articles, scholarly journals, that were just on the Beatitudes. 3 pages. I was kind of blown away. I looked for other sources. It was disquieting to see how easy it was for these theologians to focus on the first point that Jesus was making in verse 3, and how often they shifted from the attitude of spiritual orientation to a message about economic disparity and being poor in terms of money. But none of these blessings, the attitudes in the Beatitudes section, is anything other than a spiritual value. It's an attribute that anyone who desires to follow Jesus should have, anyone who seeks the kingdom of heaven. Each one of the Beatitudes is a value a person should consciously adopt and maintain, and I hope each of us seek to do so. These Beatitudes are about spiritual and not one whit pertaining to the works of this world, the material wealth, except how they relate to how a person chooses to use their material blessings. But this brings me more closer to my main point. Thanksgiving is a civil holiday set up by civil authorities, but it was intended to be a day of giving thanks to God for His blessings, for our nation, our prosperity, and His protection. And when we take full stock of the circumstances, this very moment, even in our nation today, we still are blessed among all people. One aspect of the blessing was to inspire those who founded our nation to define a government of law, a Bill of Rights that recognized freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to publish. And the amazing prosperity that we have come to enjoy is exactly because of these freedoms. These factors work to set the basis for this nation to become a place where the gospel could be proclaimed to the whole world, where the truth could be spoken and go out, and where Christians could easily practice their faith according to the way that God revealed it to them, each in their own stage of calling. We are here today because 4 centuries ago, people who wanted to build a godly society as they had envisioned it could be able to come to a new world and attempt to build a society as best they could in the form of a colony. Because they could not escape their human nature, because of their failings and flaws, and the horrible circumstances that some people were in, the society could not be perfect. Others came in their own separate attempts to form colonies. Each had successes and failures, good aspects and bad ones. According to the source from Brandeis University, under Roger Wilson, Rhode Island's 1663 charter became the first in North America to provide for religious liberty as part of the colony's organic law. In essence, the government said, we are not going to involve ourselves in any ecclesiastical issue. And that meant, I think in practical fact, that they weren't going to mandate church attendance on Sunday. And this deliberately almost secular government allowed Jews and Sabbatarians to come and live there. We don't know when the first Sabbatarians arrived, but Jews started settling there in the mid-1600s, and thus the Church of God was able to first find a home in the New World. And the Church of God then grew over the years, and one of the branches in the latter part of the 1800s became the Church of God Seventh-day, and in one branch was headquartered in Stansbury, Missouri. And it is from that environment that Herbert Armstrong began preaching and evangelizing in public. According to his autobiography, he began his radio ministry on October 9th of 1933, almost 90 years ago. And because of the way that God used his ministry, this branch of the church grew to have a noticeable public voice. At one point, his evening radio program was the largest buyer of radio time in U.S. broadcasting. At one time, the magazine, The Plain Truth, was as widely available as any of the popular news magazines of the day. Ivor Fletcher wrote in The Incredible History of God's True Church, quote, by 1979, it had produced 4,891 radio programs, 768 television programs. The total amount of literature mailed out added up to 288 million pieces. 224 million copies of The Plain Truth, 12 million copies of Tomorrow's World, 12 million copies of The Good News, a staggering total of 536 million pieces of gospel. We are here today because of the voice that God gave to the church at that time. And later, as we know, this branch of the Church of God also split into a number of smaller organizations. And where a branch was sufficient and it had sufficient membership, it became sustainable by itself. And even though these organizations are churches, They must function still as a business because they have bills to pay. In business planning, an organization cannot survive unless it reaches what is commonly called a critical mass. In the case of the Church of God, that fulfills the requirements of preaching the gospel and nurturing those who respond. The critical mass requires enough people and resources to have a viable media effort, to hire enough qualified ministers to shepherd the local flock of believers, to have sufficient other human resources to teach young adults like we do in ABC in our organization, and to have other various support services for the members' needs. And I'm walking you through how we got here today, right here today. And there are many necessary elements, one of which is the national blessing of a social and legal environment that even allows a Sabbath-keeping church to exist. Recall our recent problems just in the last year of gaining approval from the government of a country in Africa to hold Sabbath services. The next component then was sufficient prosperity so that enough people who wanted to support the Church of God were able to. They had the resources and the legal ability to transmit the funds. And the third being the society that would allow the gospel to spread. All of these components flow from the ways that God blessed the founding of this nation. Today we have come to the point in our social and legal environment where some gospel topics are almost forbidden to be spoken of in public. And that is now almost literally true with the issue of sexual morality. And while it may soon become also true for other aspects of the gospel, we must all be thankful for that we each heard the gospel expressed well enough in our time when we had an ear to hear, enough so that we could respond to God's calling at that time in our lives. And we must still be thankful for a local church that could sufficiently nurture and help each of us to grow in grace and knowledge. And we're also thankful to be able to travel to places where God places His name without undue cost or risk, and meet in a place and peace and safety, maybe even in air-conditioned comfort with coffee and snacks. This very moment that I was composing this, I saw a credible poll of 1,400 American adults on the subject of censorship. A stunning 57% of those who were aligned with one of the major political parties approved of censorship of views they disagreed with. What happens when some event draws attention of those people to the Church of God? But that day is not yet. And let us be thankful for every day that we can preach God's truth in whatever way we can preach it, using whatever media. My wife and I have spent Thanksgiving with relatives who did not mention one word of thanks to the great God for the blessings that He gave, so many physical blessings that we were enjoying on that very day, so many blessings that we can't count them. On a deepest personal level, we must each always be thankful for the spiritual things that transcend in value any spiritual blessing, any physical blessing, These blessings that Jesus listed in Matthew chapter 5 in the Beatitudes are a world apart, so to speak, from the tremendous national physical blessings of the secular Thanksgiving holiday. That blessing to be the most thankful for is God loved the world, that He gave His only begotten Son, and for all the ways that God works with each of us in our lives. He protects us and provides for us, how He inspires us, how He helps us to hunger and thirst for His righteousness, and for how we each participate in the greatest calling that anyone could imagine, to be in the first wave of those that He invites to be with our elder brother in the kingdom of God. God wants to bless. He wants all humanity to have a full and enjoyable life. And that is not possible in this age for the vast majority of humanity, but it will happen in the age to come. All these blessings are merely a means to a godly ends, so that He can bring many sons to glory. God will move heaven and earth, I think, to encourage every human to say yes in his own time, to say yes to his priceless calling. But each must say yes of his own free will. And may God complete his plan of salvation for all humanity who ever lived.